April 14th, 2026. While most people were still processing the fact that 4 astronauts had just flown around the moon for the first time in more than 50 years, the White House quietly released a document that, in the long run, may matter far more than the mission itself. It was a directive. 6 pages, dense, technical, interagency. The kind of thing that gets a paragraph in the science section of a newspaper and then disappears. But buried inside those 6 pages was an instruction that would have sounded like science fiction just a decade ago. The United States government was formally ordering its agencies to put a nuclear reactor on the moon by 2030. Not study the idea, not fund a feasibility review. Launch 1, that document known as NSTM-3, was the implementation of an executive order President Trump had signed on the 18th of December, 2025. A sweeping space policy called Ensuring American Space Superiority. The executive order set a lot of goals. Returning astronauts to the moon by 2028, building a permanent lunar outpost, beating China to strategic resources. But the nuclear reactor provision was something different in kind. Because unlike a flag and a handshake on the lunar surface, a working reactor is infrastructure. It changes what is possible. It changes who can stay. To understand why nuclear power specifically, you have to understand the problem that makes living on the moon genuinely hard in ways that most people haven't thought through. It's not the vacuum. It's not the radiation, at least not primarily. It's the night. A single night on the moon lasts 14 Earth days. 2 full weeks of darkness, during which the temperature at the equator drops to around -208 degrees Fahrenheit. And during those 2 weeks, solar panels produce nothing. Not a reduced amount, nothing useful. The amount of energy moonlight delivers to a solar panel is so negligible, it cannot even trigger most inverters. Batteries capable of bridging a 14-day gap would be enormous, heavy, expensive, and would need to be launched from Earth, competing for the most precious commodity in spaceflight, payload mass. And then there's the South Pole specifically, the permanently shadowed craters where the water ice is, the ice that could be split into hydrogen for rocket fuel and oxygen for breathing. Those areas never see the sun at all. Not seasonally, not occasionally, never, for billions of years. A base built to extract and process that ice needs power around the clock, indefinitely, regardless of solar conditions. The only technology that fits that requirement with current engineering is nuclear fission. A fission reactor doesn't care what time it is. It doesn't care about lunar night or polar shadow. It runs continuously, generating heat that gets converted to electricity. The current design target for the American Lunar Reactor, a project NASA has been developing jointly with the Department of Energy for several years, long before any executive order made it a formal priority, is at least 40 kilowatts of electrical power. NASA describes that as enough to continuously run roughly 30 households for a decade. On the moon, it would be enough to power a habitat, a rover charging station, life support systems, and early resource extraction equipment. On the south pole of the moon, in permanent darkness, running indefinitely without refueling, 40 kilowatts is the difference between a visit and a home. The American program has a history that most people don't know, and it matters for understanding whether the new deadline is credible. The only nuclear fission reactor the United States has ever successfully sent to space flew in April of 1965. It was called SNAP-10A, the name standing for Systems for Nuclear Auxiliary Power, and it was launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California on an Atlas Agena D rocket, placed into orbit around Earth. It ran for 43 days before a non-nuclear voltage regulator failure shut it down. It is still up there, in a stable orbit that will keep it aloft for roughly 4,000 years. That satellite is the entirety of American spaceflight fission heritage. 1 reactor, 43 days, 60 years ago. The gap between SNAP-10A and today was not total inactivity. In the late 2010s, NASA ran a project called KiloPower, a small reactor using a uranium-molybdenum core and Stirling heat engines, and conducted a successful nuclear ground test in March of 2018, demonstrating that a 1-kilowatt system could operate reliably. That test, known as the Krusty experiment, ran for 28 continuous hours and was the first nuclear-powered operation of any truly new reactor concept in the United States in over 40 years. KiloPower ended as a development project in 2018. It never had a mission. It never had a launch date. It sat at that stage, proven on the ground, waiting for political will, until the current administration gave it one. The new fission surface power program builds directly on Kilopower's heritage, scaling up to 40 kilowatts for the lunar demonstration and planning further growth from there. The Soviet Union, by contrast, launched more than 30 nuclear reactors into space during the Cold War, 31 BES-5 reactors to power military reconnaissance satellites, plus 2 Topaz reactors in 1987, most of them needing more energy than solar arrays could provide from polar orbit. The Soviets understood early that nuclear power and space operations were natural partners. So this is not a new idea. It is simply one that the United States largely abandoned after the 60s and is now racing to revive against a competitor that never stopped thinking about it. NSTM-3, issued by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, establishes what it calls the National Initiative for American Space Nuclear Power. It runs as a parallel effort across multiple agencies. NASA and the Department of Defense are directed to run simultaneous competitive design programs for low to mid-power space reactors. The goal is a mid-power reactor in orbit as early as 2028 and a lunar surface reactor ready for launch by 2030. NASA has been given 30 days from the date of the directive to initiate the program. The Department of Energy has 60 days to assess whether the domestic nuclear industrial base can actually manufacture up to 4 space reactors within 5 years. And that assessment is itself part of the roadmap the directive is building. The Office of Science and Technology Policy has been tasked with coordinating the whole effort across every relevant department. That last requirement is revealing: 4 reactors. That is not one demonstration unit. That is the beginning of a supply chain. It implies the expectation that one reactor leads to more, that this is not a symbolic exercise but the foundation of an actual power infrastructure on another world. OSTP Director Michael Kratsios, who unveiled the initiative at the Space Foundation's 41st Annual Space Symposium in Colorado Springs, put the stakes in plain language. Nuclear power in space, he said, will give the United States the sustained electricity, heating, and propulsion essential to a permanent, robotic, and eventually human presence on the Moon, on Mars, and beyond. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman, who appeared on stage separately and then alongside Kratsios, echoed the point. He acknowledged with unusual candor that NASA had spent more than $20 billion over 60 years on dozens of attempted space nuclear flight programs, only one of which, the SNAP-10A, ever actually reached space, and that one lasted 43 days. The new policy is intended to reverse that long-running trend once and for all. He wasn't just talking about the Moon. 3 weeks earlier, at NASA's ignition event on March the 24th, 2026, Isaacman had announced something that drew even less mainstream attention than the lunar reactor plan. NASA would launch the first nuclear-powered interplanetary spacecraft, called Space Reactor 1 Freedom, or SR-1 Freedom, before the end of 2028. The mission would carry 3 Ingenuity-class helicopters, known as the Skyfall payload, to Mars to scout potential crewed landing sites and demonstrate something the United States has never done in space, using a nuclear fission reactor not just for power, but for propulsion. The reactor, producing roughly 20 to 25 kilowatts of electricity, would power electric thrusters, converting the energy into a slow but continuous acceleration that over months of flight adds up to something a chemical rocket simply cannot match for deep space efficiency. The spacecraft would repurpose the power and propulsion element already built for the now-canceled Lunar Gateway space station, keeping costs down and the schedule alive. A launch window in December 2028 is the target. The reactor runs on HALEU, high-assay, low-enriched uranium, not the highly enriched uranium used in Cold War-era systems. The detail that much of the hardware already exists in some form is worth pausing on. This is not a program starting from a blank sheet. It draws on decades of research, components from canceled programs, expertise from the Department of Energy's national laboratories, particularly Idaho National Laboratory, and the accumulated knowledge of engineers who have been working on small fission systems for years without ever having a specific mission to build toward. The NSTM-3 gave them one, with a deadline attached. This is the timeline that is quietly making aerospace analysts catch their breath. Because around 2029, China's Chang'e 8 mission is also expected to arrive on the Moon. and Chang'e 8 is designed to do more than collect rocks. Let's back up and trace the other side of this, because it's essential to understanding why the White House acted with this kind of urgency. China has been building toward permanent lunar presence for over a decade in a systematic way that doesn't always get the attention it deserves in Western coverage. Their lunar program, the Chang'e series, has proceeded through every technological challenge with an unhurried deliberateness that reflects the long-term thinking of a program insulated from electoral cycles. Chang'e 3 in 2013 was the first successful soft landing on the moon since the Soviet Luna program in the 1970s. Chang'e 4 in 2019 was the first soft landing on the lunar far side in the history of spaceflight, a feat so technically demanding that it required building and launching a dedicated relay satellite just to maintain communications through the moon's bulk. Chang'e 5 in 2020 returned lunar samples to Earth, the first time any nation had done that since the Soviet Union in the 1970s. Chang'e 6 in 2024 brought back samples from the lunar far side, a place no mission had ever sampled before. Each mission solved a problem that the next one needed solved. It is not improvisation. It is engineering at scale, executed on a timeline that doesn't get renegotiated every time the administration changes. Chang'e 7, which arrived at its launch site in April of 2026 and is expected to lift off in the second half of that year, is a South Pole reconnaissance mission. Orbiters, landers, a rover, and a small flying probe specifically designed to hop into permanently shadowed craters and search for water ice. The data from Chang'e 7 feeds directly into Chang'e 8, which the China National Space Administration officially confirmed in April of 2025, is scheduled for launch around 2029, targeting the Leibniz Beta Plateau near the lunar South Pole. Chang'e 8 carries a different mandate from anything that came before, building the foundation of the International Lunar Research Station, known as the ILRS, testing technology for autonomous construction, verifying in situ resource utilization, the technical term for making things from materials already present on the moon rather than hauling everything from Earth, bricks made from sintered lunar regolith, structures assembled by robotic systems before any human arrives. Nuclear power is explicitly in the ILRS architecture. In May of 2025, China's space agency CNSA and Russia's Roscosmos signed a formal memorandum of cooperation to build a nuclear power plant on the moon together, intended to supply the ILRS. The signing happened during a visit to Moscow by Chinese President Xi Jinping, which tells you something about the level at which this is being treated as a strategic priority, not merely a technical one. The reactor would be deployed between 2033 and 2035, built and installed autonomously without human presence on the surface. Meanwhile, since around 2021, reports confirmed by researchers involved in the project have described a separate Chinese program to develop a high-power nuclear reactor for space applications, funded by the central government since 2019. Academic papers published in Chinese peer-reviewed journals have described designs in the range of 1 megawatt or higher, though full technical parameters and launch timelines have not been officially released through public Chinese government channels, and independent verification of the full scope remains limited. What is confirmed is that related work underwent evaluation by China's Ministry of Science and Technology, and that it fits within the trajectory China has consistently described for long-term deep space infrastructure. If the reactor performs anywhere near what researchers have described, it would represent power output far beyond the 40 kilowatt American demonstration target, enough for industrial-scale operations rather than a proof of concept. The framing of all of this as a race is tempting and not entirely wrong, but it misses something important about what's actually being contested. The United States and China are not simply trying to get to the same finish line first. They are building incompatible architectures for what the moon's energy infrastructure looks like, and the first one built becomes the one everything else plugs into. NASA's approach is competitive and commercially driven. Multiple private companies bidding on reactor designs in parallel, commercial supply chains, a mix of civil and defense applications, with Lockheed Martin already under contract since June of 2022 for the fission surface power concept, and smaller nuclear startups seeing their stock prices climb sharply in the week after the NSTM-3 announcement. China's approach is state-directed, long horizon, built around the ILRS framework that, as of April 2025, counts 17 countries and international organizations as members, including partners from Africa, Asia, and South America that have not signed the American Artemis Accords. Whichever architecture gets built first becomes the de facto standard. The one that comes second is essentially asking to integrate into a system it didn't design. The stakes extend beyond the moon itself. Both NASA and the Chinese program see the moon as a way station, a place to prove technologies and accumulate resources that enable the next step. SR-1, Freedom heading to Mars in 2028, is not a detour from the lunar program. It is a preview of what nuclear power unlocks for the entire inner solar system. A reactor that works in deep space is a reactor design that can power a Mars surface habitat. Propulsion technology demonstrated on the way to Mars is propulsion that cuts travel times to the outer planets. The reactor on the moon is not the end of the story. It is the proof of concept for everything that follows. There's a physics dimension to this that adds urgency beyond the geopolitical competition. The permanently shadowed regions at the lunar South Pole, the ones with the water ice that both programs are targeting, are finite. They exist in specific craters. The good landing sites near those craters, with sufficient solar illumination for power during the non-shadowed phases and acceptable terrain for landing, are limited. NASA's own site selection, last updated in October of 2024, identified 9 candidate regions near the lunar South Pole for its Artemis lunar landings. China's Chang'e program has surveyed overlapping territory. A working nuclear reactor changes the calculus of that geography entirely. A base that doesn't need sunlight for power can operate from locations that a solar-dependent base cannot. It can be placed closer to the ice. It can run extraction operations during the full 14-day lunar night. It can maintain life support through conditions that would force a solar-powered habitat to hibernate and wait. In a practical sense, not a legal sense, the Outer Space Treaty remains in force. A nuclear-powered base at the lunar South Pole is a qualitatively more permanent kind of presence than any alternative. You can take down a solar array and relocate it. Nobody unplugs a reactor and moves it somewhere else. Kratzios said it clearly when he announced the initiative. Nuclear power in space will give the United States the sustained electricity, heating, and propulsion essential to a permanent presence on the moon. The key word is permanent. Not a mission, not a visit, not a flag, a presence. There are real questions about whether the timelines are achievable. The only nuclear fission reactor the United States has launched into space flew 60 years ago and ran for 43 days. SR-1 Freedom uses hardware repurposed from a canceled program, being assembled under a schedule that aerospace engineers describe as extraordinarily compressed. The lunar reactor program is being accelerated from a multi-year project toward a presidential deadline, and implementation depends on appropriations approved by Congress. Whether the United States can actually do all of this by 2030 is a question that engineers are asking out loud, not just critics. But here's what isn't a question. The decision has been made. The executive order is signed. The memorandum is issued. The agencies have their deadlines. The companies have their signals. Both sides are now on the record. Both sides have timelines. The question is no longer whether nuclear reactors will run on the moon. It is who gets there first, what power level they achieve, and whether either side's schedule actually holds. One of those reactors will light up first. It might be American, compact, 40 kilowatts, running on uranium, built to survive the 14-day lunar night, a machine that would mark the first time in 60 years that the United States has operated a nuclear fission reactor in space, and the first time any nation has ever run a fission reactor on a body beyond Earth. It might be Chinese and Russian, automated, installed without a human hand touching it, feeding a base that 17 countries and international organizations have already committed to join, producing power at a scale that the American 2030 timeline has yet to match. The moon has been dark for a long time, not metaphorically, literally. Each night, 14 days of darkness, temperatures that shatter unprotected equipment, a silence that has lasted since before the dinosaurs walked the Earth. Solar-powered missions manage the night through hibernation, shutting down and waiting for daylight to return. They survive, but they cannot work. Nuclear power changes that equation completely. It does not hibernate. It does not wait. For the first time, a fission reactor will run on another world, through the night, through the polar shadow, through every condition that stops everything else. Who gets to build it, who gets to run it, and who writes the rules that govern what it powers? That is what the next few years are going to decide. If you made it this far, leave your thoughts in the comments, good or bad. It truly helps the channel grow. Hit like, subscribe for more content like this one, and take a look at the video on your screen that I think you'll really enjoy.